Hi everyone, Dr. Beckton here with a 12 slide overview, pun intended, about the 12 steps, relapse prevention, and spirituality in addictions counseling. So, as a matter of overviews, we'll take a look or think about relapse prevention models. So, I'm inviting you to do that right now. We're going to look at one model specifically. Then, we'll talk about self help or mutual support groups, 12 step facilitation, recovery meetings, and group process, how those things interact with each other. So let's take a look at Marlat's relapse prevention model here. This is a cognitive behavioral relapse prevention model. I hope that you will read the paper Relapse Prevention and Overview of Marlat's Cognitive Behavioral Model. It gives an overview of this model that suggests that both immediate determinants such as high risk situations, coping skills, outcome expectancies, and the abstinence violation effect, and covert antecedents such as lifestyle factors, urges, and cravings can contribute to relapse. This model allows us to incorporate lots of different strategies as a therapist with our clients to address each step of the relapse process. You may also want to refer to your textbook and other literature that you have read about relapse prevention. But the idea generally is that in order to avoid a slip, a lapse, or a relapse, we want to learn how to deal with high risk situations in a way that is more helpful to us in the long run. We want to challenge outcome expectancies or a person's set or paradigm of beliefs related to substance use so that they can make decisions to do something else instead. One example that I'll use, if a person has a belief that by introducing the substance or the behavior to their body that they will reduce their feeling of anxiety and depression, is we want to teach something different, coping skills or some lifestyle factors that can help them achieve that same effect without introducing a chemical to their body or engaging in addictive behavior. When it comes to self help or mutual support groups, there are several out there. You have read about them in your textbook or discussed them in class. But there are secular organizations for sobriety, which was started many, many moons ago. Rational Recovery, which has a real individual focus, is more of a self help group than a mutual support group, which is why I use both of the terms here, though I tend to prefer the language mutual support group. Smart Recovery, which is based on a cognitive behavioral model. Women for Sobriety, Moderation Management, Celebrate Recovery are some alternative models. We're going to focus primarily on 12 step recovery here, so you don't see that listed on this slide, but we're going to talk about that next. When it comes to 12 step meetings, there are a number of meetings for any variety of addictions, addictive behaviors that you could think of. So I bet if you told me an addictive behavior, I could probably tell you the appropriate 12 step group or an analog to that behavior. So there are groups that address chemicals specifically: alcohol, cocaine, marijuana, opioids, methadone, heroin. There are groups that address the gamut. Alcoholics Anonymous is appropriate for any addictive behavior. Narcotics Anonymous, again, is appropriate for any addictive behavior, though we tend to think of those in isolation. There are multiple groups to address sex. So Sexaholics Anonymous, Sex Addicts Anonymous, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, Love and Sex Addiction Anonymous. There are groups to address disordered eating, Overeaters Anonymous, Gray Sheeters Anonymous, Eating Disorders Anonymous, for examples. There is a Clutterers Anonymous, there's Sleepers Anonymous, Relationships Anonymous, Codependents Anonymous, Adult Children of Alcoholics. I could go on. Debtors, Shopaholics. I think you get the point. In any case, regardless of the name of the 12 step fellowship, the 12 step principles and the 12 steps remain the same, with exception of some moderate, minute changes in the language and an adjustment in the substance or behavior that is addressed in step one. We'll note that the substance or behavior is only addressed in step one. So recovery is not about the substance, but about so many other things. 12 step meetings can occur in a variety of formats. The primary one we think about is whether it is an open meeting or a closed meeting. Open meetings are designed for anyone to be able to attend. Often they are attended by people who believe they have a problem with that particular substance or behavior. They're often attended by people in the community, by medical professionals, by counseling or therapeutic professionals, by friends and family members. Closed meetings are for people who believe that they have a problem. So only if you believe that you have a problem that can be helped by being in that fellowship would you go to that particular meeting. In terms of formats, 12-step meetings can be a literature study, which means they're studying some book associated with that group. So that could be the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book, that could be the NA Basic Text, that could be the Green Book in Sex Addicts Anonymous, it could be the Red Book in Adult Children of Alcoholics. Some meetings are discussion, so someone might bring a topic, relapse for example, or spirituality, and that's the topic of all of the shares for that day. It could be a speaker meeting. A speaker meeting is when someone comes and shares their experience, strength, and hope with others. This is going to be really important as we start to talk about Yalom's therapeutic factors in just a few moments. But in a speaker meeting, a person will essentially share what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. And what they're sharing is how they were in the depths of their addiction. They're describing the unmanageability so that each person in the room can begin to relate with them from their own experience. They're going to share what happened. What was the factor that helped them decide to get treatment, to get engaged in the 12-step program of recovery, and help them find their way towards recovery. And what it's like now is what their life looks like as a recovering person. So those are the things that they'll share. One of the things that is often encouraged is that you identify, don't compare. When we identify, we recognize the similarities in our own experience and the person's story who's sharing, then we can be inspired and get more help that we need. But when we compare, oh, well, I wasn't that bad, or I didn't do that, then we're basically negating their experience and negating the fact that we potentially have a problem. So we want to identify in rather than compare out. The other meeting type is a step or tradition study, and this is when the meeting is focused on studying the 12 steps and or 12 traditions of the fellowship. You might also want to call this a literature study, but this is a very specific type of literature study, so it's not simply a reflection and discussion, but a focused study of the 12 steps and 12 traditions, since that is what the program is about. So we'll take a look here at the 12 steps of AA. I won't read them, but I'll note here that in step 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. That's the first and only time that we will hear or see the substance or behavior identified in any of the steps. When we look at step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, what we're saying is we're realizing that some entity, some organization, some group of people outside of us could help us combat the unmanageability that we noticed in step 1. In step 3, we're making a decision. We're deciding. We're not actually doing something, but we're just deciding that we want to do something different just for today. Step 4, about making a searching and fearless moral inventory, is about self-reflection, developing self-awareness. Step 5 is that we share that with someone else. In step 6, we become willing to let go of things that aren't working for us. So we recognize things aren't having a payoff that's desirable, and we decide to do something different. Step 7, we ask for help doing something different. Step 8, we make a list of people that we've harmed and become willing to make amends to them all. And this is really recognizing the people that have been impacted by our behavior and going to them and saying, hey, I messed up. In step 9. So step 8, we make a list, we become willing. In step 9, we make direct amends when possible. That's when we go to them and we say, hey, I messed up. This is what I did that was wrong. This is what I should have done differently. I wonder how I can correct this relationship with you. And if that involves someone or something that's not an individual, then you talk with your sponsor about ways to do that. No one should be carrying out step 9 without assistance from another person. Step 10 is we continue to evaluate. So we continue to self-reflect and be aware of what's going on. Step 11, we practice prayer and meditation. So we practice self-reflection, we practice mindfulness, we practice conscious awareness that we do not exist alone in the universe. And we ask for help in identifying the next right action. When we don't know that ourselves, we ask someone else to help us identify what that is. And in step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. So you'll notice that it says carry this message to alcoholics here, but it really means to anyone who has the same problem as me. And I want to show them, this is what I did, this is what worked for me. It might work for you too if you're willing to give it a try. And I wanted to go through those that way to kind of translate the steps a little bit. You might get a little bit of a different take on it depending on who you ask, but those are the steps as I understand them. Relatedly, there are often principles associated with each of the steps. So we'll talk a little bit about what those are. The first step is about practicing the principle of honesty. This is honesty about the nature of the addictive behavior. This is honesty about the impact it has had on other people, how I can't control it, and how it's created some unmanageability in my life. Step 2 is about hope, and that's the belief that things can get better. So when it says we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, that is definitely about recognizing that, hey, things don't have to be that way. Things don't have to be like this. They can be different. Step 3 is about faith, and that is, willing to step out and take a risk and do something different. Step 4 is about courage. It can really take a lot of courage to self-reflect, to be willing to do a deep dive into ourselves and into our challenges. Step 5 is often about integrity or trust. That's being willing to own up to our errors. Step 5 says that we, admit it to ourselves, to our higher power, and to another person. What kinds of things we discovered in step 4. So really, this is us, taking ownership and responsibility for the challenges and helping us to develop trust in another person. Step 6 is about willingness. Just, I'm willing to try something different. Step 7 is about humility. That's recognizing that I don't have all the answers, that everything hasn't been working for me, and I can consider something different. Step 8 then is about responsibility and self-discipline. So taking the actions necessary, taking full ownership, recognizing the problems associated with one's own behavior. Step 9 is about love, restitution, or brotherhood. So we'll focus on restitution because this is where we're saying, hey, not only am I responsible for this error, but I want to correct it in some way. And we'll say that brotherhood could also be sisterhood, personhood, or humanity there. Step 10 is about perseverance. So this can be really tiring and we want to keep it up. We want to keep on keeping on, keep doing it. Step 11 is about spiritual awareness or spirituality. This is when we're recognizing our impact on the universe, recognizing the universe's impact on us, and really taking the actions that we need to feel connected to other people. I've heard it said that addiction is really a lack of connection to others and to the world. So this step really helps us to focus on that. And then step 12 is about service. This idea of carrying the message that a person can change can be a really important part of someone's recovery. So you may have read a portion of the big book. Perhaps you read the chapter Into Action or the chapter before that. But I'd like to read this excerpt from later in the text, Appendix 2, which is a spiritual experience. It says, the term spiritual experience and spiritual awakening are used many times in this book, which upon careful reading shows that the personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself among us in many different forms. And what I think is important here is the idea of personality change. So when the big book talks about a spiritual experience and spiritual awakening, it's talking about that. A lot of times people want to associate this with religion or faith experiences, and that's not necessarily true, but it's really talking about a lot of the behavioral changes that we witness in people that are in substance use treatment, that they begin to take personal responsibility, that they become more honest, that they practice more self-discipline, they become more open and more engaged with their community in the world. And at the end of that appendix, that's Appendix 2, which you can find on page 567 in the 4th edition of Alcoholics Anonymous. But there's a quote at the end on page 568 that is from Herbert Spencer. Actually, before I do that, let's go back to this. The last paragraph of that appendix says, "We find that no one need have difficulty with the spirituality of the program. Willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness are the essentials of recovery, but these are indispensable. Without them, you cannot be successful," essentially. So the quote from Herbert Spencer says, "There is a principle which is a bar against all information, which is proof against all arguments, and which cannot fail to keep a man in everlasting ignorance. That principle is contempt prior to investigation." I imagine you might have experienced this when we asked you to go to 12-step meetings, or when we asked you to participate in an abstinence or withdrawal project. Contempt prior to investigation. Which is why we ask you kind of to identify what your thoughts or beliefs are about the assignment. This is really an analog to what happens when a person is going to pursue membership in one of the 12-step fellowships. They might look at it and say, "Hey, that's for them, that's not for me." Smack their teeth, roll their eyes, do whatever else. And one of the things that's really important is for us to demonstrate the principles of honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness for our clients as a model, and to encourage them to demonstrate these principles as well and be willing to try different things that might support their recovery. So let's take a look at Yalom's therapeutic factors. All of these things are present in the mutual support group. We'll talk about 12-step groups specifically, but looking at universality, this is the idea that other people have had my experience. That is the power of the 12-step fellowship. Altruism, that is an analog to step 12 in service. Installation of hope, we talked about that principle of hope. This belief that, hey, I got better, you can get better too. Guidance, so providing some direction. This is something that a sponsor can do, or a person who has more time in recovery can do. Imparting information is done by every member of the group. Developing social skills, people learn to speak respectfully. They learn to engage others in conversation. They learn how to listen. Interpersonal learning happens in all of the steps when you learn about yourself. Cohesion, so you learn to stick together. You develop a network of recovering peers. Catharsis, the experience of sharing one's story can be cathartic. I mean, I realize I'm using the word in line with its definition, but I'm reminded of the webinar that we hosted at North Carolina Central in March, when one of the members of Sex Addicts Anonymous said, "I have a lot of shame around my addiction, and there's no better way to combat that feeling of shame than to share my story with a group of students and or practitioners." So there's some catharsis experience when one shares their story. So the speaker at a speaker meeting, for example, is not only helping the people that are there listening, but they're really doing a lot of help for themselves. Existential factors, so finding meaning, learning to accept the human condition. That's a lot of what step 3 is about, to be quite honest. Imitative behavior, so people learn from modeling how to be differently, and then a corrective recapitulation of the primary family group. So I really believe that groups are a recapitulation of the family experience, and being in a group can help a person work through some family challenges. So in the 12-step group, where everyone is learning to practice these therapeutic factors and learning to practice the principles of the 12 steps, everyone kind of has this sense of openness and willingness if they're actively engaged in the program. There will certainly be people there that aren't doing that. But when you find a good group, you'll find a lot of people that are working really hard to be better people, which can really be a corrective experience for someone. So find your fun. What is it that you like to do? Do you like to fish? Do you like to camp, sail? Do you like to swim? Do you like to sew? Whatever that is, when it comes to the human condition and accepting it, it's really important for us to find meaning in our lives. What are some things that allow us to find meaning, to experience the world in a different way, to connect with ourselves, to connect with others, to exist as spiritual beings? And when I think about spirituality, I'm thinking about values, what's a guiding force or direction in a person's life. This is not necessarily about religion, though it is that for some people, but just a different way to think about it. When I work with people in 12-step philosophy based treatment, some will identify their higher power as Mother Nature or, the earth. I like to call higher power creator. Creator of everything that exists, creator of the world, the universe, creator of me, creator of life, creator of everyone that I work with. So find what you connect with, find your fun, and do that to support your recovery experience. So my question for each of you right now is, what will you do for your recovery today? In terms of your physical recovery, what might you do? What about your emotional recovery? What have you lost that you want to get back? What about your spiritual recovery? What do you need to do to connect with the world and other people? Is there a faith tradition that you'd like to practice? Something to think about. In order to help you do that, I've identified some useful links and references here. So you'll find a link to 12-step tools, what to expect at 12-step meetings, the NA Basic Text, the AA Big Book, a website, Faces and Voices of Recovery, which I hope you will visit and I hope will be helpful to you as you continue to learn about recovery. There's some information on the American Bar Association and the North Carolina Physicians Health Program. This may give you some perspective about the way professional monitoring organizations are helping their members work toward recovery. And there's a citation for the Larimer, Palmer, and Marlatt article from 1999, an overview of Marlatt's cognitive behavioral model that's about relapse prevention. So you can find that at that citation. Let me know what your questions are. I hope to hear from each of you soon. I hope this lecture has been helpful. See you online or in the classroom, whichever way it's set up this semester.